Hi, this is Omar at Top 5 E-Bikes, and this is a full review on the Aventon Aventure. In this video, we're going to go over the specs of this e-bike, we're going to talk about test rides, and then we're going to get into our final thoughts where we'll cover positives and negatives of this particular e-bike. Also want to mention that about 5 months ago, we published a video where we compared 4 different fat tire e-bikes. And that was a video where we went through the process of how we actually decided on buying this particular e-bike. So check it out. That one includes 4 of the most popular fat tire e-bikes in this class, including Rad Power Bike's RadRover 6 Plus. Alright, so let's talk about the specs of this e-bike. At the time we filmed this bike is $1,999, and it's actually loaded with components that you don't normally see in this $2,000 fat tire e-bike category. So let's start off with one of the main events component-wise, which is the motor. It's a Bafang 750 watt sustain that peaks at 1130 watts. You also have a Shimano Acera drivetrain. The battery is a 48 volt, 15 amp hour battery with a total of 720 watt hours. You can see here they did a great job of just integrating into the body of this e-bike. And not to be overlooked or forgotten are some of these other components, like the fact that you have a front suspension. You have fenders both in the front and the back tire. There's also an option to add a front rack. We didn't add a front rack, we actually only bought the rear rack. You have hydraulic brakes with this e-bike, which are another big component of it. You have integrated lights both in the front and the back, and we'll touch on this later in the review. Just overall, they did a really good job with this e-bike in terms of the look and the way they've exposed everything. So design-wise and quality-wise, we love this e-bike. Although it's not included in the price of the bike, for $50 you can get the rear rack. And then finally, a couple more noteworthy components are the full color LCD display that actually comes in with an integrated app, which we really liked. And then also the Shimano Acera trigger shifters, which are super nice. Now let's talk about our test rides with this e-bike. At the time of our video, we've ridden this e-bike around 100 miles, and both Damon and I rode this e-bike. We rode it both on light trails and rougher trails, because let's be honest, that's like the proper way to ride this e-bike. But we also wanted to ride it on paved roads. There are 3 words or 3 phrases I think that come to mind when thinking about this e-bike. Powerful, attention to detail, and beautiful. Powerful because you feel the torque as you're riding through any type of terrain or elevation. We've now ridden the RadRover 6 Plus and the Magicycle, and maybe the Magicycle is as powerful as this e-bike, but it's definitely more powerful than the RadRover 6 Plus. Speed-wise, you'll be able to get up to 28 miles per hour with pedal assist, although throttle only is going to be limited to 20 miles per hour, which is the legal limit. Range-wise, we didn't do a range test or a throttle test like we tend to do with a lot of e-bikes, because guess what? Aventon is actually one of the few e-bike companies that will publish real-life range information on their e-bikes. Based on the 100 miles that we've ridden on this e-bike, the ranges posted by Aventon are pretty much match our experience, which are around 27 miles with throttle only. So in addition to powerful, I think attention to detail is another phrase that I think of when I think of this e-bike. And I think of it because there are so many upgraded components for a $2,000 e-bike, which make the ride comfortable and easy. An example is a drivetrain. It's a Shimano Acera drivetrain, and the shifting is so smooth and easy with the trigger shifter, especially in comparison to the now standard thumb shifter that you see on most e-bikes, including the RadRover 6 Plus, the Himiway, and the Magicycle. In addition to the shifting ease, this e-bike comes with the hydraulic brakes, which in my opinion are necessary with an e-bike with such a powerful motor. And my last word is beautiful because it's such a great looking e-bike. It has good weld jobs. They integrated everything into this e-bike, both the lights, the wiring, the battery, so it just all adds up to a good looking e-bike. Overall, we had such a blast riding this e-bike, and it's been such a joy to ride this e-bike with, again, those things that I mentioned, the attention to detail, how powerful it is, and how beautiful it is. So now we've talked about the specs of this e-bike, we've talked about the test rides, and these are our final thoughts. 4-inch fat tire e-bikes are super popular these days, probably one of the most popular style of e-bikes.
And with good reason, because you could take it on any type of terrain. You could see that we're on a dirt trail right now, but we could have filmed this on a paved road as well. In our initial video, when we started comparing different e-bikes and when we were trying to choose an e-bike, we didn't actually ride any of these e-bikes because we didn't have access to them at the time. And we chose the Aventon Aventure just based on stats and based on what, you know, we could compare in an Excel sheet. And now we can say, after riding 3 out of those 4, because now we've ridden 3 out of the 4, we've ridden the Magicycle, the RadRover 6 Plus, and then now, and we've owned this one. Now we can say confidently that, at least for us, that this was the best bike. And we don't regret the decision of buying this e-bike. So now let me talk about the positives and negatives of this e-bike. And I'm going to start off with the positives. The first one, and I would say the one that stands out the most, is how powerful this motor is. So you got a 750 watt Bafang motor that actually peaks at 1130 watts, and you have a ton of torque on this e-bike. We were going uphill, this thing was a beast. So it's just a super powerful motor. You don't question that it's a 750 watt that almost gets to 1200 watts. So for sure, one of the best and one of the most positive features of this e-bike. The second one I'm going to mention is just attention to detail on this e-bike. So there's an attention to detail in so many of the components and the way they built this bike. And what that leads to is just a really smooth and comfortable ride. And you see that it's partly based on some of the components. It's also just attention to detail in terms of how the look of the e-bike. So it's just a great looking e-bike. And those things make it feel like it's a more expensive e-bike. So it's a $2,000 e-bike. I mean, if someone told me that it was $2,500, I'd probably think that it was a good value at $2,500. Another positive is that this is just a sturdy e-bike. And we've ridden a ton of e-bikes at this point. A lot of times you ride these e-bikes and you hear noises, or there's certain parts or components that you're not really sure about. That's not something I can say about this e-bike. It just seemed like it's a well-crafted and engineered e-bike. And every single component and area of this bike seems to be on point. And the last positive I can mention about this e-bike is that if you don't feel comfortable buying directly from a company that's going to sell you a bike online, you can actually buy this bike at a dealer. So that's super nice. And I think that's one of the huge positives about buying an Aventon bike, is that you can go to any of their dealers around the country and you can buy this bike from them directly, and they've assembled it for you and they can service it. So if you're not comfortable buying direct to consumer, like directly from the brand, then you can buy from a dealer. And that's not something you could say about most of the brands that are out there selling e-bikes today. Now let me talk about some of the negatives, because it's not all, this is not a perfect e-bike by any means. So some of the negatives, the first one I'm going to start off with is this is a heavy e-bike. It's 73 pounds. So it might be too heavy for some people. I should mention that most of the e-bikes in this category, these 4-inch fat tire e-bikes that are 750 watts, they have similar weight. But again, it's just a heavy e-bike. Do want to mention that as a negative. The second one, which for some people it might not bother them, for me it kind of bothered me, there's a delayed throttle on this e-bike. So most e-bikes today have real-time throttle, meaning that the moment you press the throttle, it'll actually take off. With this e-bike, you get a little bit of a delay of about a second to 2 seconds. So you press down on the left thumb throttle and it takes a couple seconds to take off. Another point about the throttle is that you have a max of 20 miles per hour, which is what the law says it should be, but there's no way to actually increase the throttle speed. So keep that in mind. So another negative, and we mentioned this as a positive, but for some people it might be a negative, is that this is a super powerful e-bike. 750 watts sustained, 1130 max wattage. So this is a pretty powerful e-bike with throttle. For some people, they might not be comfortable with the super powerful e-bike. You might want to go with something that's maybe 750 watt max versus sustained. So if you're not looking for a super powerful e-bike, then this might not be the one for you. So I got a couple more negatives. These are more nitpicking, but just notes that we wanted to make and share with you. One of them is that the brake lights, and there's integrated lights on this bike. We talked about it in the specs. The brake lights, there's actually only one brake light. It's on the left-hand side. So there's not a rear brake light on the right, which is kind of strange. Like, why would they add just one? I mean, again, we've mentioned that they're really on point in just the details. That's one detail that they missed, in my opinion. Another negative, just from nitpicking here, is the fact that to turn this bike on, you actually have to press this button on the battery. and then you turn on the actual e-bike. So not a big deal, but most e-bikes are not that way. Most e-bikes, you put in the battery, you might have to turn on the key, which those are also annoying, but most e-bikes, you just put in the battery and you turn it on. With this one, there's been people that have ridden it, they're like, hey, how do I turn this on? It's not turning on. But it's because they have this other feature where you have to turn on the battery. And the last one I'm going to mention, which is again more of nitpicking, is the pedal clearance. So the pedal clearance on this particular e-bike, if you're turning and you're depending on where the pedal is, you could potentially hit the ground. I actually hit the ground a couple times, hit the pavement. Not a big deal. This is lower clearance. We actually measured a couple other e-bikes that had higher clearance, but did want to mention that. So we've talked about the positives and negatives of this e-bike, and now I want to close it out for you. If you took this e-bike and we just looked at the specs of the motor, which is a 750 watt motor, and you took the battery, which is a 720 watt hour battery, and you looked at the price of $2,000, you'd be like, well, that's a great bike, just based on the motor and the battery alone. And then you add some upgraded components like the hydraulic brakes, the Acera drivetrain, and all the brake lights, so all these little details here. And add all those things up, and what do you get? You get what we think is the best 750 watt fat tire e-bike that's under $2,000. And that's the Aventon Aventure. Let us know if you have any questions or comments either about this e-bike or any of the fat tire e-bikes that we mentioned in this video. We're really interested in hearing your thoughts or any of your feedback if you bought this particular e-bike or any other ones. Thank you for watching, and let us know if you have any questions or comments.